Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us for today's IBM Tech Exchange webinar. I have just a couple of housekeeping things I'd like to go over before we begin. You should see a Q&A box directly on your screen where you can begin to submit any questions that you have for the presenters. And later today, you'll be sent the on-demand recording link along with a link to the IBM Security Verify community where you can connect directly with our experts. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the presenters.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for joining us, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching the recording. We're excited to have this webinar specifically on being able to discuss how we reduce fraud during user onboarding and login with IBM Security Verify and identity proofing solutions such as ID Data Web. Today, we've got Colton, Matt, and myself who will be talking through the scenario, the technologies, and more importantly, the use case and the outcome. What we'll be going through is just setting the context of the scenario and the pain points, talking about the solutions that are used, IBM Security Verify and ID Data Web as the proofing solution, and then we'll get into the demo to actually show you what a user experience looks like, as well as the end-to-end scenario of how to integrate and configure some of these experiences to drive the outcome, which is reducing fraud and getting more trusted experiences. So with that, let's get started. The first thing that I want to put in the context is the scenario and the pain point. So all of us are in the space of identity and access management, fraud, risk, and just digital interactions. So I'm not going to get into too much of the data points, as a lot of that has been reported on, surfaced, as well as conveyed. But one thing that I do want to lead with is $1 of fraud equates to $3.75 of cost for e-commerce and retail organizations. And as you look at the cost of data breach with other organizations such as healthcare, that can get into the billions of dollars very quickly. Now, when we think about this, we think about some of the pain points, and here I'm going to be setting up the scenario. So scenario one, many interactions are digital first, requiring trust to be established on account creation, right? So when we think about account creation, these are identities, these are individuals that either are interacting with the organization without an account previously, or with a set of attributes that then need to be further validated that it's actually them that is claiming their account, or corroborating that it is their account that they will subsequently then use. So as many interactions become digital first, the notion of being able to establish trust on account creation is paramount. The second scenario, and I guess pain point that is being addressed here, is once an account is created, there are existing modes to ensure that subsequent interactions are trusted, right? So you can think about things around MFA, as well as passwordless authentication with things like passkeys. But the individual, if not vetted or proofed upon account creation, is still subject to fraud, because a fraudulent account can be onboarded, but then subsequent interactions can be protected with MFA and passwordless. The day zero operation, the onboarding is really here what we're looking to address and helping to provide value and capabilities for. The last thing is traditional forms of proofing, such as having someone claim their social security number, first address, first job, are antiquated modes and require more secure and less impersonable ways to do that. So someone cannot impersonate that, just getting data from, for example, Facebook or Google, but being able to get this data, in a more modern way, in a more live way. So with that, what we'll be taking you through is what is IBM Security Verify in the context of IAM, and what is ID Data Web in the context of ID proofing. And this is where Matt will talk about the ID proofing components. So let's get started now. Now that we've set the context, let's get started on, what are the technologies, what are the tools, and then what outcomes did they drive for? So IBM Security Verify is an identity and access management solution. It's an identity as a service with the mission to help securely connect any identity to any resource. It fundamentally offers continuous access management and dynamic governance and lifecycle management. This is in the context of both workforce and consumer identities, supporting the standards around OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, SCIM, passkeys, as well as more emerging standards that are being driven in the W3C consortium. Our goal here and our solution here provides the ability to protect resources that are on cloud, on premises, as well as web, mobile, and traditional resources like databases, servers, VPNs, and so on. This is done in a way where we've delivered a platform that inherently contains the capabilities for single sign-on, multi-factor, risk-based authentication, passwordless, having full visibility and reporting of what users are doing, as well as lifecycle management capabilities. Now, when we dive a little bit deeper, Verify SaaS is broken down into the 4 plans that I alluded to, and we won't spend too much time enumerating exactly what comes in each plan, but fundamentally, this is a full end-to-end identity and access management solution to protect workforce and consumer identities. There's also corresponding modernization components that help you bridge on-prem application management as well as user management to then migrate or coexist while centralizing your access management and governance use cases using IBM Security Verify SaaS. You'll see a demo of this from Colton in terms of what is Verify SaaS, but it'll be in the context of ID proofing. But this is just to give an overview of the breadth of the capabilities that Verify SaaS offers. Single sign-on, multi-factor, risk-based authentication, and governance and lifecycle management are the 4 core subscriptions with the corresponding then capabilities and features that it delivers end-to-end. Specifically for Verify SaaS, we're deployed in six regions. We have a 99.99% SLA, and we have a breadth of certifications across different industries and verticals. Just to paint the picture that this is a global service supported in many regions with high availability as the utmost importance for us as well as our customers. Now, let's talk about reducing fraud, and then I'll turn it over to Matt to talk about the ID proofing. But natively in Verify SaaS, there's really 4 modes of fraud prevention and mitigation that we offer. The first is around risk-based authentication that leverages user context in real time as users are authenticating. This looks at vectors such as time of day, type cadence, IP address, internet service provider, country, and more, device posture, and more as we look at and assess the risk score. This risk score then can enable prompting of passwordless, for example, MFA, for example, based on the risk score of very high, medium, or low. The other aspect here is we have runtime decisions to look at if users are using compromised passwords, leveraging our collaboration with IBM Security X-Force, as well as be able to identify large-scale identity attacks coming from suspicious IP addresses. So that's vector 1. Vector 2 is, and this goes into the proofing aspect, but we also integrate with third-party risk solutions using a extensible call-out mechanism that allows Verify to call out to risk solutions, get a risk score, and make a decision point natively in Verify. So there's a risk integration. As we discussed, natively Verify supports passkeys and passwordless to help reduce fraud, to get to more secure methods of interactions with digital identities. And then the last thing we'll talk about is around identity proofing, which is the subject of this webinar, in which Verify has built out capabilities to seamlessly integrate with proofing vendors such as ID Data Web to allow for additional levels of trust and fraud reduction at the different life cycle of a digital identity, which here can be account creation or even login. So with that, let me turn it over to Matt to talk about ID proofing and ID Data Web.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Matt Cochran. I'm on the product team here at ID Data Web, and really excited about the opportunity to talk about kind of what we do in conjunction with IBM Security Verify today. So so basically where we fit into this picture is when you're giving somebody a digital credential, it's really important to know that you actually are dealing with the correct individual versus somebody who's claiming to be somebody that they're not. This is a pretty old problem, but as time moves on, hackers get more sophisticated, more data becomes available, and it's important to kind of keep at the cutting edge of how you can do this effectively while also balancing user experience with all of it. So to kind of get into that, just to kind of set the stage a bit, the way that we look at it is there are kind of these three levels of trust that you may have with a user when you're initially setting up an account with your system. The very lowest level of trust is what is known as a self-asserted identity. You could think about this as like, maybe an email credential, like a Gmail type credential, where you can go in and you can kind of sign up to be whomever you want. They're not proving that you are who you're claiming to be when you're typing in your name, for example. And that's absolutely fine for kind of what they're trying to do. But for many more sensitive use cases, that's certainly not good enough. One level above that is what is known as a validated identity. This is where you are collecting and validating PII about an individual. So, maybe collecting the name, the date of birth, the address, the social security number. The person comes, they type all of that in, they click confirm. Oftentimes a third-party API is used to resolve that all of those attributes are actually connected. And then what it gives you back is, yep, this is great. All this data is connected. You're good to go. The problem with this, though, is that if you're just doing this, there's really no proof that the person on the other side of the device actually is this individual. This person could have just, as was previously mentioned, this person could have just bought all of this data from the dark web, moments prior. Now they're coming into your application and, pretending to be somebody that they're not, and that's known as new account opening fraud. So again, this is certainly a little bit better, but definitely not best in class in 2023. This brings us to this concept of a verified identity, and this is really where ID Data Web focuses. So the real key difference between a validated identity and a verified identity is not only are we doing that data validation, but we're taking some additional step to tie the user through some sort of a challenge to the digital identity that they are claiming. So in this very simple example, you could see a person completes a phone possession check. Maybe they get a link or a passcode sent to their mobile phone number. The phone number that was used to prove that possession of that device can then be validated to be registered to the name that this individual is claiming. So when you think about it sort of through this graph-based approach, this is how you can tie a person through some sort of a challenge to a digital identity. This is really what true identity verification is all about. So the problem comes into this situation just from a complexity perspective when you start looking at the different options, the different data that's required to do this. So you may be able to verify kind of an individual's name and their PII and tie it back to the person. But oftentimes organizations, depending on what industry you're in, may need to validate additional things about a person. For example, in banking, you'll have the KYC AML requirements, which require some additional attributes. Government spaces, you'll be looking at the NIST identity assurance level guidelines. These are all kind of specific additional steps that need to be taken. Each one of these lines on this, or the edges on this graph, typically represents a different data source. So oftentimes organizations are left with this problem of like, well, how do we connect all this data together? How do we get it all somewhere where we can make a decision on it? How do we deal with the flexibility? Taking that even a step further, typically all of these identity attributes have risk metadata associated with them. So you may be able to connect a person through a phone to a name to a social security number. What happens if that SSN belongs to somebody who is deceased? Or what happens if the phone number that was used actually has been recently ported or SIM swapped, or is maybe an unsafe phone type to interact with, like a non-fixed voice over IP phone number? These are all incredibly important things to consider when you're kind of establishing that upfront trust with a user. The problem is just how do you pull it all together? How do you get all of that data and make it seamless with the rest of your account opening process? So that's really where we come into play. There's 3 key points about ID Data Web. Firstly, what we do is we operate a cloud that is called the Attribute Exchange Network. We hook into many of the industry's top individual data sources. So you could think of the big credit bureaus, telco data providers, government issued ID verification services, threat intelligence services. We hook in with all of these APIs, and you can consider these to be basically building blocks inside of our system. On top of that, what we've built is a fully self-service admin console. What this allows our customer administrators to do is to come in and set up exactly how they want to verify their users. We have a number of out-of-the-box, single-click deployment, what we call workflows. We'll get into that in a second. And these workflows typically are great starting points that are ready to go right out of the box, can then be hooked in with your other tools, and you can kind of take it from there. This also offers comprehensive reporting, analytics, everything you need to be able to see, what happened with a specific transaction, all the way up to how is the overall program going from sort of a pass-fail rate perspective, as well as getting into the fraud analytics as well. We have a lot of features there. Last but not least, this is really relevant for this presentation is how we do integrations. We also support OpenID Connect and SAML 2.0 from an integration perspective. What this means is when you are using another tool like IBM Security Verify that also supports standards, this makes it very simple to hook one tool into the other. So essentially what you can do, and this will be demoed in a few minutes, from your IBM Security Verify tool, you can redirect your user over to ID Data Web. They can be proofed up to the level that you've specified. And then as an outcome, we return the results back. That data can be parsed and taken action on. If it's approved, they're good to go. If it's denied, maybe there's additional steps that need to be taken as well. So, low code, no code is really important for us, and it's great for these partner integrations like we're talking about here today. We also offer a full REST API. So if there's additional, maybe you start with kind of the redirect, if there's additional like downstream integrations you need for right before a payment is made, or right before, even, maybe an account recovery process or a password reset, you could think about ID Data Web as being available for sort of all of those key moments where you need to establish or recover trust with a specific end user. Our goal is to, be as flexible as possible to fulfill those types of requirements. We have three solutions. We have AXN Verify, Manage, and Batch. Verify is kind of what we're talking about today, which is our identity verification solution. We also offer AXN Manage, which allows you to do sort of additional kind of ongoing risk analysis at authentication time. And then we also offer AXN Batch, which basically deals with your existing directory data, your identity lifecycle, for example, being able to determine the quality of your data of your existing users in your directory, and also things that change about them. So like for a B2B example, is this credential that we gave out to this user, does that person still work at that company, or should we maybe reconsider if they should even have this account, have access to that account at all? But again, today we're going to be focused on AXN Verify. So from a verification perspective, we offer these three what we call verification templates. Each one of these is sort of a standalone way that you can establish trust and actually verify the identity of your end user, proving that they are who they're actually claiming to be. We have mobile match. This was the example I gave at the beginning, which is essentially sending the person, confirming that the person has access to a specific phone, and then in addition, validating that who they're claiming to be is actually also registered to that same device through our data network. This also includes additional risk signals, which we'll get into here in a moment. BioGov ID, this is the process of walking the user through the process of taking pictures of their government issued ID, perhaps a driver's license, a passport, and then also taking a picture of themselves. What this then does is it ties the person's face to the document, authenticates the document, and matches the data from the document to who the person is claiming to be. So that's how we do identity verification through BioGov ID. Lastly, we offer dynamic KBA. The way that this works is that the data is collected asserted by the end user. This is then used with our credit bureau partners to generate dynamic questions that are going to be simple for the user to answer if it is truly them. So these are not static questions that you type in the question and then you also type in the answer so you can answer the same thing again later. It's not just another password Instead, what we're talking about here are questions that are going to be using your credit history, your education background, sort of key details about you to give specific questions that you can answer as a part of the dynamic KBA process. With all three of these, we also do a tremendous amount of risk analysis, analyzing device, location, network, user behavior, and then very specific attributes for each one of these. And we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a second. Key point with our system is that you don't just have to choose one. Instead, you can build what we call a verification workflow. The way that this works is that you can, for example, start your users through a simple verification method like mobile match. You can expect anywhere between 75 to 85% of users to pass any one of these steps. So the majority of your users will get through the first step. What happens to the users that can't pass? Maybe they have only have a work issued phone that's not registered to who they're claiming to be, for example. In that case, we don't just have to kick them out of the process and tell them to, hey, go call the call center or open up a ticket. Instead, with our system, we can dynamically step them up to an alternative, in this example, BioGovID. So what that means is, as a outcome of all of this, what you get is you get extremely high approval rates if you use kind of multiple steps and build sort of a dynamic workflow. This gives the opportunity for users to kind of solve their own problem, prove their identity without having to escalate it, without having to figure out how to get through it. Gives it allows you to kind of meet the user in the middle to give them the tools and the options that they need to prove that they are who they're claiming to be. Just to go a little bit deeper, we already kind of talked about mobile match. Some of the key points I wanted to just make here, though, is in addition to just doing the data validation and matching and all of that, just to take a quick look at the risk side of this. So being able to determine at the moment that you're sending the text and matching this data that, hey, this is a safe phone to interact with is really important, right? You could see one thing that we see pretty often is hackers are using phone number porting, or in general, taking advantage of SMS-based security to basically try to get codes sent to their phone that they actually are not registered to. This is a very common tactic, but because we have access to all of this data and we can check this in real time, if a user passes through mobile match, it gives you a good level of assurance that this is not an unsafe device. This is somebody that we can trust, and this is a method of verification that is trustworthy going forward as well. On the BioGovID side, just from a risk perspective, yeah, I mean, in addition to just analyzing the risk of the person's device that they're on, let's say they're on a desktop, we can also analyze the risk of the person's phone as they're capturing the images. So we send the person a text, they take the images in real time. As a part of that, we can do things like measure the distance between where is the phone that they're taking pictures of the GovID from versus where is their desktop, right? If they're doing sort of that desktop to mobile flow. We're also doing liveness detection. So at the moment of capture, is this person taking a picture of a picture, like a printed piece of paper? Are they taking a picture of a screen? These are all checks that are built in and kind of ready to go as a part of this process as well. Okay, so hopefully that gives you just some good context on the specific solution that we're talking about here today, which is our AXN Verify solution. Up next, we're going to take a look at sort of how these things work together. So I'll go ahead and pass it off. Thank you.
Howdy. Okay, so I will be talking about how IBM has kind of integrated that into the ISV product. So the integration-based document proofing is what we really wanted to focus on mostly, as that's the most secure. So what our integration does is we offer an OIDC-based identity proofing for vendors using attribute scripting. That way we can take attributes from vendor A, B, C, and map them to our process. So we can take a registration form and map it to whatever each vendor needs. We've also positioned ourselves to support the OIDC identity assurance specification once it's finalized. That's still in a proposition phase, so we're waiting on that to be finalized, but we are set up to go ahead and consume that whenever it is available. To enable this use case, we had to add a couple things. We had to add the ability to configure custom OIDC providers. Not only is it useful for this solution, but we can use that in the future for other integrations as part of like a login or risk flow, other available flows. We also needed to write custom identity proofing flows. Not only is this going to be integrated into our registration flows, but it could be in the future added to authentication flows, access-based flows, or even standalone flows. And I'll show you a couple demos of those today. We also needed to expand our hosted flows, the user registration flows, and the custom application flows, which I will also be demoing here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and start this demo. Let me share my screen. Okay, so when you get into the admin portal, the first thing you're going to want to do to configure identity proofing is you're going to want to create an integration. And you can see we have a section called OIDC providers. I've got a couple already configured. The way you're going to configure that is you give it a name. Let's call it test 6. You can enter some contact information so that we know who configured this. You can leave it blank as well. I'm going to use some spoof data. And you just go through configuring some basic information that you would need for OIDC provider connections, like your issuer, your metadata URL. This would be the base for the JWK endpoint, the well-known endpoint, the token URL so that we know where to get the token, and then some other common configurations that are needed. These should be provided by your vendor. And so we can create that. And we can see that it created this new one. We'll go back to the providers page and we can see that it showed up. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to want to configure an identity proofing flow. So under user experience identity proofing, you'll create an identity proofing flow here. So I'm going to call this identity proofing demo. You've got some basic configurations, like what do you want your primary language to be, whether we want to include some attribute collections, whether or not we want to send the attributes that we collected to the third party, a theme. I'm going to use a pre-configured theme here. In the future, we plan to support more than just OIDC, but currently we only support OIDC flows. We're going to select an integration. I'm going to choose ID Data Web. We want to assign our configuration, and we want to base our information on the user info endpoint. Here, we've got some outgoing attribute mappings. What this is this takes the attributes that we collect in the form and convert it to something that the vendor knows, in this case, ID Data Web. So we're going to map given name to F name, last family name to L name, and just kind of write that in a way that is consumable by the vendor. We have a link that kind of talks about how to write this scripting language for more information on how to do that. You can also run a test to see what that would look like. So if I click run test here, we can see it's going to transform this data that we have in our form into something that ID Data Web understands. Next, we have the response attribute mapping. When a vendor responds to us, each vendor is going to be different. So we need to map that to attributes that ISV understands. So this would be the mapping from vendor to ISV. And then the last section that we have is the decision mapping. So the overall decision that the vendor came to, whether the identity proofing was approved, denied, or if it is obligated and needs some kind of step up. So I'm going to go ahead and start building this flow. This should take us to the flow builder page. And here we can show what kind of attributes that we want to collect about the user. I'm going to leave it as the default for now. Things like email, first name, last name, and mobile number. And we did select to send these over to the third party. We can change this text so that it says whatever we want for the end user, so it's completely customizable. It's what you see is what you get editor. And so we can see all the steps that we're going to go through here. So I'm going to go ahead and publish that. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a user registration page. This user registration page is going to consume that flow that we just created. So I'm going to create registration here. Similar flow as the other one. It's going to have a couple of different options, as this is the registration piece. Now we're going to want to enable that identity proofing, and we're going to select the flow we just made, ID proofing demo. We have the option to take a custom timestamp so that when this identity proofing is completed, we can take that timestamp and store it with the user so that we know that the last time an identity proofing occurred. This can be useful for risk-based flows or authentication-based flows in the future once we start to more broadly integrate that. So I'm going to go ahead and start building this flow. You can see it's going to look a little different as a part of a user registration. We want to collect things like the email address and the account password. So I'm going to save these changes and go ahead and publish this flow. So that's everything that an administrator would need to do to set this up. Now let's take a look at how it is going to be consumed by the end user. So the end user is going to go to the registration page and it's going to look like this. You can see it's got the email address and account password that they had before. And we're going to just create some information here. And see, password meets all the criteria, so we can move on to the next steps. We'll click create an account, but we want to prove that identity. So you can see that email address was passed from the registration page to the identity proofing page and is now non-selectable. That's a pre-filled that they don't want to change. So now we're going to fill in the rest of the information that we're requesting, and we're going to go prove the identity. And now we're going to come to the page that's going to let the end user know that they're leaving IBM and they're going to be routed to a third-party vendor. If they don't want to do that, they can stop here, but we're going to go ahead and proceed through that. So this handed us over to ID Data Web, and the flow I'm going to show you right here is the mobile match flow. So I'm going to continue. I'm in the United States. I do have to provide valid information here. And what this is going to do is this is going to send me a text message to validate that I have the cell phone in my possession. And so this should mobile match me and it will route us back to our flow and we can say identity proofing is complete. And we continue, and now the account is created. And when I press continue, it should route me to the authentication page where I could log in. We can validate that that user is there. I got an email, and yes, that user has been created June 13th, 2023. The next flow I want to show you is how we can integrate with a third-party application. So I created an application that consumes these identity proofing flows. That way, if you don't want to register a user, but you want to protect a certain portion of your application with an identity proofing process, you can absolutely do that. For this flow, I'm going to do the document-based matching. So here you're going to press prove identity, and this is going to route you to that same page that we saw before. However, you can see it didn't pre-fill because I didn't collect any information. So this is the standalone flow. So I'm going to fill this information in, and now we're going to be redirected to ID Data Web, but this is going to be the BioGov ID matching. So I'm going to select driver's license, but you can see there's other options, passport, identification card, but we're going to go with driver's license. I'm going to press continue. It's already got my phone number from that previous step, so we're going to continue on mobile. What this is going to do is right now it is sending me a link that is going to hook into ID Data Web's process for collecting driver's license information through photo verification. So right now I'm taking a picture of my driver's license. And apologies, this is going to take me a bit of time to get just right. And it does check. It does a lot of different checks for like blur check, glare check, and the resolution check. And obviously, it is not liking what I am doing. bear with me as we get through this. Okay, I liked that photo, so let's move on now. I'm taking a picture of the back of my driver's license. All right, I liked that. And now I'm taking a selfie. So it's going to validate that I am the person in possession of the identity as well. All right, and so now we should see that process uploading, and it should change this screen momentarily. Okay, so you can see it's collected my driver's license and my selfie, and I'm going to confirm this information, and it's going to see if I am who I say I am. All right, so it did validate my identity, and now we're going to route back to the application where we can see the information that it was collected about me. You can see the decision was approved. We can see it was a driver's license flow, and then we can see all of the data that was validated about me through my driver's license. So that's how a customer can use the standalone flow to just do identity proofing as well. All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand it back off to Millen. Millen, are you there?
Oh, sorry, was on mute. As we close off the webinar, thanks, Colton. As we close off the webinar, so Colton took us through the scenario of an admin setup and an end user setup. It was pretty evident how seamless and integrated that was. And that's really the experience that we're looking to deliver as we work with the folks at ID Data Web and what we look to deliver with IBM Security Verify. So with that, I wanted to just close on a few things. There's a few takeaways related to some of the key capabilities of what IBM Security Verify provides, as well as some of the key capabilities ID Data Web provide. There's a QR code here to try out both instances of Verify as well as ID Data Web. And then just some details around, what are some of the outcomes realized with Verify SaaS with customers that are adopting it today. Again, this session is recorded. We appreciate you joining. Thanks again to Matt and Colton for taking us through their pieces. And we really see this as a fundamental requirement to a lot of customers, especially as a lot of organizations are looking at reducing fraud, reducing breaches, and really establishing that trust upfront with individuals as they interact with them digitally first now. So with that, we appreciate you taking the time and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.